I've always believed that love is a quiet thing, a steady current beneath the surface of life, not some grand explosion of passion that burns out in a flash. When I married Eleanor, I thought we'd built something like that. Solid, dependable, the kind of bond that could weather any storm. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 9, and in that time, I'd come to know her as well as I knew the rhythm of my own breath. Or so I thought. My name is Daniel Harper, and this is the story of how my world came apart, piece by piece, in ways I never could have imagined. Eleanor and I met in our mid-20s, at a community theater production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I was a stagehand, hauling props and untangling ropes in the dark, while she played Hermia, all fire and grace under the stage lights. I was smitten from the first rehearsal, though it took me 3 months to muster the courage to ask her out. She said yes, and from there, our life together unfolded like a well-rehearsed script. We moved in together after a year, got engaged 2 years later, and settled into a modest house in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. I worked as a structural engineer, designing bridges and buildings, while Eleanor taught drama at a local high school and directed community plays on weekends. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours and it felt enough. We didn't have children, though we talked about it early on. Eleanor wanted to wait until her career felt more stable, and I was content to let her set the pace. Instead, we filled our home with books, plants, and a scruffy rescue dog named Baxter, who'd sleep at the foot of our bed and snore like a freight train. Our evenings were spent cooking together, laughing over glasses of wine, or curled up on the couch watching old movies. I thought we were happy. I thought we were unbreakable. But looking back, I see the cracks I missed. The late nights she spent at rehearsals, the way her phone would buzz and she'd tilt the screen away from me, the moments when her laughter felt just a little too bright, like she was performing for an audience I couldn't see. It started with the play. Eleanor had been cast as the lead in a local production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, a role she'd coveted for years. She was thrilled, spending hours memorizing lines and dissecting Maggie's character with a fervor I hadn't seen in her since our early days. I was proud of her, even if it meant she was gone most evenings, leaving me to tinker with my model bridges or walk Baxter alone. The director was a man named Julian Voss, a charismatic figure in the local theater scene. I'd met him once or twice at cast parties. Tall, with sharp cheekbones and a voice that seemed to hum with quiet intensity. He had a way of making everyone feel like they were the only person in the room, and I'd noticed how Eleanor's eyes lit up when she talked about his vision for the play. I didn't think much of it at the time. She was passionate about her craft, and Julian was just part of the package. But then there were the small things. The way she'd come home later than usual, her hair slightly mussed, her cheeks flushed with something more than the chill of the autumn air. The way she'd linger in the shower, as if washing away something I couldn't see. The way her phone would light up with messages from Jay that she'd read and delete before I could glimpse them. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I've always trusted Eleanor, believed in the life we'd built. But those moments started to pile up, like pebbles in a stream, redirecting the flow of my thoughts. One night in October, I decided to surprise her at rehearsal. It was a Thursday, and I'd finished a project early, leaving me with a rare free evening. I packed a thermos of coffee and a couple of her favorite oatmeal cookies, thinking I'd sit in the back of the theater and watch her work. The community center was a 10-minute drive from our house, a low brick building with a faded marquee. I parked in the lot, noticing how few cars were there for a rehearsal night. The lobby was dark, the ticket booth shuttered, but I could hear voices from the auditorium, low and intimate. I pushed open the door, expecting to see the cast running lines or blocking scenes. Instead, the stage was empty, the house lights dim. The voices were coming from backstage, and something in their tone, soft, conspiratorial, made me pause. I set the thermos and cookies on a folding chair and moved quietly toward the sound, my boots silent on the worn carpet. The backstage area was a maze of curtains and props, and as I rounded a corner, I saw them. Eleanor and Julian. They were standing close, too close, in a pool of light from a single overhead bulb. Her hand was on his chest, his fingers brushing her cheek, and they were talking in murmurs, their faces inches apart. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The air between them was charged, heavy with something unspoken but undeniable. My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming where warmth used to be. I wanted to step forward, to call out, to do something, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Then Julian leaned down, and Eleanor tilted her face up, and they kissed. Not a stage kiss, not a performance, but something real, hungry, alive. I don't know how long I stood there, watching my wife kiss another man. Could have been seconds or minutes. My mind was a blank, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor laughed softly, and Julian said something that made her smile. A smile I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. I turned and left, moving like a ghost through the darkened theater, the thermos and cookies forgotten on the chair. Driving home, I felt numb, as if my body belonged to someone else. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that it was part of the play, a rehearsal moment taken out of context. But I knew better. I'd seen the way they looked at each other, the way their hands lingered, the way the space between them seemed to hum with secrets. When I got home, I sat in the dark, Baxter curled up beside me, his head heavy on my knee. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the life we'd built, the photos on the walls, the dishes in the sink, the evidence of a marriage that suddenly felt like a lie. Eleanor came home an hour later, her voice bright as she called out, "Daniel? You home?" I didn't answer right away, and when she found me in the living room, she paused, her smile faltering. "Hey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to confront her, to spill everything I'd seen, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, "Long day. Just tired." She nodded, accepting the lie, and went to change, her footsteps light on the stairs. That night, she slept beside me, her breathing even, while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been slipping away from me. The next few weeks were a slow descent into a kind of quiet madness. I didn't confront her, not yet. I told myself I needed proof, something concrete, not just a stolen moment in a darkened theater. But the truth was I was afraid. Afraid of what she'd say, afraid of what it would mean for us. So I watched her, more closely than I ever had. I noticed the way she'd text someone when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she'd leave the room to take calls, the way she'd come home with excuses that didn't quite add up. Rehearsals running late, a flat tire, a last-minute meeting with the cast. Each lie was a brick in the wall growing between us. I started digging. I'm not proud of it, but I did. I checked her phone one night while she was in the shower, scrolling through her messages with shaking hands. There was a thread with Jay that she hadn't deleted, full of cryptic texts that could have been innocent but weren't. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Missed you today. You make this so hard." My chest ached as I read them, each word a confirmation of what I'd feared. I didn't copy the messages or take pictures. I didn't want to be that person. But I memorized them, letting them burn into my mind. I started following her, too, just once or twice when she said she was going to rehearsal or meeting a friend for coffee. One evening, I parked across the street from the community center and watched her car pull into a lot near a small cafe instead. Julian was there, waiting at a table outside, and when she sat down, their hands brushed across the table, lingering longer than necessary. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, and waited for her to come back with another lie. By November, I was a man divided. Part of me still loved Eleanor, still wanted to believe we could fix this, that she'd come back to me if I just gave her time. But another part, a darker, colder part, was waking up, whispering that love wasn't enough, that trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt. I started thinking about what I'd do if I confronted her, what I'd say, how I'd make her feel the weight of what she'd done. I didn't want to be cruel, but the hurt inside me was growing, festering, turning into something sharp and unforgiving. I began to plan, not just a confrontation, but something more, something that would make her understand the depth of the betrayal, the way it had hollowed me out. I didn't know what form it would take, not yet, But I knew it would be precise, deliberate like the bridges I designed. Every beam, every bolt, every calculation had to be perfect. And so would my revenge. The weeks following that night at the theater were a slow bleed. I carried the image of Eleanor and Julian like a splinter under my skin, sharp and constant, impossible to ignore. Every moment with her became a test of endurance. Her laughter, her touch, the way she'd hum to herself while making coffee in the morning. These were things I'd once cherished, but now they felt like performances, each one a reminder of the secret she was keeping. My name is Daniel Harper, and this is the story of how I began to unravel the truth and weave a plan that would change everything. By mid-November, the air in our house had grown thick with unspoken tension. Eleanor seemed oblivious to it, or maybe she was just too good an actress. She'd come home from rehearsals with stories about lighting cues or costume fittings, her voice bright and practiced. While I nodded and smiled, my responses mechanical. I was playing a role too, the devoted husband, the one who didn't suspect a thing. But inside, I was a storm waiting to break. I'd stopped sleeping properly, my nights spent staring at the ceiling or scrolling through her social media, looking for clues I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Baxter, our dog, seemed to sense the shift. He'd stopped sleeping at the foot of our bed and started curling up by the couch, as if he didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. I needed more than suspicions, more than fleeting glimpses of their intimacy. I needed evidence, something undeniable that would force Eleanor to face what she'd done. So I became someone I barely recognized. I bought a small tracking device online, a discreet gadget meant for locating lost keys or luggage. It arrived in a plain brown box, and I hid it in the lining of her purse one morning while she was in the shower. The app on my phone showed her movements in real time, a glowing on a map, tracing her path through the city. I told myself it was just for clarity, just to confirm what I already knew. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line, stepping into a version of myself that was colder, more calculating. The tracker painted a picture I couldn't unsee. Most evenings, Eleanor's dot moved from the high school, where she taught, to the community center for rehearsals. But twice a week, it veered off course, stopping at a small apartment complex on the east side of Portland, a place I'd never heard her mention. The first time I saw it, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the app, my heart pounding. I drove to the address, a nondescript brick building with a flickering streetlight out front. Her car was parked in the lot, next to a sleek black sedan I recognized as Julian's. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I sat there for an hour watching the windows, imagining what was happening behind them. When her dot finally moved back toward home, I drove away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I started documenting everything, not just the tracker data, but her texts, her excuses, the time she came home late with her hair slightly mussed or her lipstick smudged. I kept a notebook hidden in my desk, a meticulous record of her betrayals. It wasn't enough to know she was with Julian. I needed to understand the scope of it, the depth of her deception. I hacked into her email. Not something I'm proud of, but desperation makes you do things you'd never consider otherwise. There were messages from Julian, innocuous on the surface, about rehearsal schedules or script notes, but buried in the threads were hints of something more. A winking emoji here, a vague reference to last night there. Nothing explicit, but enough to confirm what I'd seen in the theater, what I'd felt in my gut. One evening I went further. Eleanor had left her laptop open on the kitchen table, and while she was upstairs changing, I opened her cloud storage. There were photos, hundreds of them, from rehearsals, cast parties, backstage moments. Most were innocent, but a few stopped me cold. Eleanor and Julian, their heads bent close over a script, their smiles too intimate for colleagues. Another of them at a cafe, his hand resting on hers, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The worst was a selfie, taken in what looked like a bedroom, Eleanor's hair tousled, Julian's arm around her shoulders. They were laughing, carefree, as if I didn't exist. I closed the laptop, my breath shallow, and went outside to walk Baxter, needing the cold air to keep me from breaking something. The knowledge was a weight, but it was also a catalyst. The more I learned, the more my hurt hardened into something else, resolve. I didn't want to just confront Eleanor. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal, the same gut-wrenching loss I was carrying. I wanted Julian to face consequences too, not just for what he'd done, but for the arrogance of thinking he could take what was mine without a price. I started thinking about revenge not as a fleeting impulse, but as a project, something I could engineer with the same precision I brought to my bridges. I began by researching Julian. He was a public figure in the local theater world, so it wasn't hard to find information. He was 38, divorced, with a reputation for being a visionary director and a bit of a charmer. His social media was a curated gallery of his achievements, posters from past productions, glowing reviews, photos with actors and donors. But there were gaps, hints of a less polished side. A few ex-posts from former colleagues mentioned his intensity or demanding nature, and one cryptic comment suggested he'd left a previous theater company under a cloud. I dug deeper, using public records and a few discreet inquiries to mutual acquaintances. I learned he'd been sued by an actress years ago for inappropriate conduct, though the case was settled out of court. It wasn't much, but it was a thread to pull. I also started watching Eleanor more closely, not just her movements but her behavior. She was different now, though I hadn't noticed it before. She was more distant, her affection perfunctory, like she was going through the motions. When we talked, her eyes would drift, as if she were somewhere else. But there were moments when she'd slip, when the mask would crack. One night, over dinner, she mentioned Julian's name unprompted, praising his genius for a lighting choice in the play. Her voice was too warm, too eager, and when I didn't respond, she faltered, changing the subject. I saw it then, the guilt flickering in her eyes like a shadow. I decided to test her. It was a small thing but deliberate. I told her I'd be working late one evening, a lie to see where she'd go. The tracker showed her heading to Julian's apartment again, staying for 2 hours before returning home. When she walked through the door, her cheeks flushed. I asked casually how her night was. "Oh, just rehearsal," she said, avoiding my eyes. "We ran through Act 2. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside, the storm was growing louder. The plan for revenge began to take shape in early December. I didn't want to just expose their affair. That was too simple, too fleeting. I wanted something that would linger, something that would make them both feel the weight of their choices. I started by gathering more evidence, not just for myself but for what I was planning. I installed a small audio recorder in her car, hidden under the passenger seat. The recordings were grainy, but they captured snippets of her conversations with Julian, flirtations, plans to meet, moments of laughter that cut me like glass. One recording was particularly damning. Eleanor's voice, soft and intimate, saying, "I wish we could just stay like this. You and me. No complications." Julian's reply was muffled, but I heard enough. "We'll figure it out, Ellie. We always do." Ellie. She hated that nickname, or so she'd told me years ago. Hearing it in his voice was like a punch to the chest. I also started laying the groundwork for something bigger. I contacted a friend, Marcus, who worked in IT and owed me a favor from a project I'd helped him with years ago. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get his help. I asked him to look into Julian's digital footprint, his emails, his financials, anything that might be useful. Marcus was discreet, and within a week, he'd found something. Julian had a side gig, a small consulting business for corporate team-building events. It was a front, Marcus suspected, for funneling money, possibly to avoid taxes or hide income from his divorce settlement. It wasn't illegal, not exactly, but it was shady enough to exploit. I also reached out to a private investigator, a woman named Carla who specialized in discreet surveillance. I hired her to follow Julian, not Eleanor. I didn't want to risk her spotting someone tailing her. Carla was efficient, delivering a report within days. Photos of Julian meeting Eleanor at his apartment, at cafes, at a park late at night. A timeline of their movements, cross-referenced with my tracker data. It was clinical, detached, but it fueled the fire inside me. By Christmas, I had enough to destroy them both. But I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. I wanted the moment to be perfect, timed for maximum impact. The play was set to open in January, and I knew that would be the stage for my revenge. I started planning something elaborate, something that would expose them not just to me, but to everyone who mattered to them, their colleagues, their friends, the entire theater community. I wanted Eleanor to feel the shame of her betrayal in front of the audience she lived for. I wanted Julian to lose the reputation he'd built, the one he hid behind like a shield. I began sketching out the details. I'd use the recordings, the photos, the emails, everything I'd collected. I'd find a way to weave them into the play's opening night, a public unveiling that would leave them nowhere to hide. I contacted the theater's tech crew, posing as a concerned donor, and got access to their lighting and sound systems. I started working on a presentation, a montage of their affair that would play on the theater screen during the performance. It was meticulous, like designing a bridge, every piece calculated to bear the weight of my intent. But as I planned, I felt the darkness growing inside me. I wasn't just a betrayed husband anymore. I was something else, someone consumed by the need to make them pay. I didn't tell anyone, not even Marcus or Carla. This was mine to carry, mine to execute. And as the new year approached, I felt the storm inside me building, ready to break. The new year arrived like a cold wind, stripping away the last remnants of the life I'd thought I had. January in Portland was gray and relentless, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world. For me, that weight was real. A ledger of betrayals, a plan meticulously crafted, and a heart that had grown hard as steel. My name is Daniel Harper, and this is the story of how I brought my world crashing down on those who'd shattered it. The opening night of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was set for January 15th, a Friday. The community theater had been buzzing for weeks, with posters plastered across town and social media posts hyping Eleanor's performance as Maggie. She was radiant in the promotional photos, her eyes fierce and alive, and I hated how beautiful she looked, knowing that spark wasn't for me anymore. I'd spent the weeks leading up to the premiere finalizing my plan, every detail engineered with the precision I brought to my bridges. This wasn't just revenge. It was a demolition, calculated to expose Eleanor and Julian in a way they'd never recover from. I'd kept up the facade at home, playing the supportive husband. I'd ask Eleanor about rehearsals, nod at her stories, even help her run lines when she asked. Each moment was a knife twist, but I needed her to suspect nothing. She was distracted, her mind elsewhere, and I could see the guilt in her now. Not overt, but in the way she'd avoid my eyes or linger too long in the bathroom, as if washing away her secrets. Julian, I knew from Carla's reports, was equally oblivious, strutting through rehearsals like a king, confident in his charm and his hold over Eleanor. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. My plan hinged on the theater's tech system. I'd learned from my donor inquiries that the sound and projection booth was run by a volunteer crew, overworked and undertrained, making it easy to slip in unnoticed. I'd spent late nights in my home office, editing the evidence I'd collected, audio clips from the recorder in Eleanor's car, photos from Carla, screenshots of their texts and emails. I wove them into a 5-minute montage, a devastating narrative of their affair. Eleanor's voice, soft and intimate, saying, "I wish we could just stay like this, you and me." Julian's laugh, low and conspiratorial. Photos of them at his apartment, their hands entwined, their faces close. I added captions, stark white text on a black background. Asterisk, this is what betrayal looks like. Asterisk, asterisk. This is what they hid from you. Asterisk, the final frame was the selfie from Eleanor's laptop. Her hair tousled, Julian's arm around her. With the words, asterisk, they thought you'd never know. Asterisk. I burned the montage onto a USB drive and tested it on my laptop, watching it over and over until the images no longer made my stomach churn. I'd also hacked into the theater's lighting system, rigging a simple script to dim the house lights and lock the booth's controls for 5 minutes, ensuring no one could stop the projection once it started. The tech crew would be helpless, the audience captive. I chose opening night for maximum impact. Eleanor's colleagues, friends, and the theater's donors would all be there, a full house to witness her fall. The week before the premiere, I started planting seeds. I sent anonymous emails from a burner account to key people in the theater community. Board members, donors, a few cast members, hinting at concerns about Julian's conduct. I didn't mention Eleanor. I wanted her to feel the shock of exposure without warning. I also reached out to Marcus again, asking him to dig deeper into Julian's financials. He found more unreported income from his consulting business, enough to interest the IRS if someone tipped them off. I filed an anonymous report, attaching Marcus's findings, knowing it wouldn't hit until after the premiere but would add to Julian's ruin. At home, Eleanor was a whirlwind of nerves and excitement. She'd pace the living room, muttering lines, or sit at the kitchen table with her script, her brow furrowed. I watched her, wondering how she could live this double life so effortlessly. One night, she caught me staring and asked, "What's wrong, Daniel? You've been so quiet lately." I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand why she'd thrown us away, but I just smiled and said, "Just work stress. I'm proud of you, you know." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. I wondered if she felt the storm coming. The night of the premiere arrived, cold and clear, the theater glowing under strings of white lights. I dressed in a suit, playing the part of the supportive husband one last time. Eleanor was already at the venue, doing final preparations, so I drove alone, the USB drive in my pocket like a loaded gun. The auditorium was packed, the air humming with anticipation. I took my seat in the 5th row, nodding to familiar faces, Eleanor's colleagues, her drama students, the theater's board members. I spotted Julian near the stage, adjusting a prop, his confidence unshaken. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. He had no idea what was coming. The house lights dimmed, and the play began. Eleanor was magnetic as Maggie, her voice carrying the raw desperation of the character. I watched her, torn between admiration and rage, knowing this was her last performance before everything changed. The first act ended to thunderous applause, and as the intermission lights came up, I slipped out, claiming I needed air. I made my way to the tech booth, where the volunteer crew was distracted, chatting over coffee. I'd visited the booth days earlier, posing as a donor again, and knew the layout. It took 30 seconds to plug the USB into the projector's laptop and upload my script to the lighting system. I set a timer for 10 minutes into the second act, when Eleanor would be center stage, delivering one of Maggie's monologues. Then I returned to my seat, my pulse steady, my hands calm. The second act began and I waited. Eleanor was mid-monologue, her voice rising with passion. When the house lights flickered and went dark, the stage lights stayed on, pinning her in a stark spotlight, and then the projector hummed to life. The screen behind her lit up with the first image, her and Julian at the cafe, their hands touching. The audience murmured, confused, as her voice faltered. The audio kicked in, her recorded words filling the theater. "I wish we could just stay like this, you and me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor froze, her face pale, as the montage continued. Photos, texts, the selfie, each one a hammer blow. The captions burned across the screen. Asterisk. "This is what betrayal looks like." Asterisk. The audience was stunned, some whispering, others staring at Eleanor, who stood motionless, her script forgotten. Julian appeared from the wings, his face ashen, trying to signal the booth, but the controls were locked. The montage ended with the selfie and the final caption. Asterisk. "They thought you'd never know." Asterisk. The screen went black, and the house lights came up. Silence gripped the theater, heavy and suffocating, until someone in the back started clapping, slow and mocking, and others joined in, a cruel wave of sound. Eleanor ran off stage, her costume trailing behind her. Julian followed, shouting for the tech crew. The audience erupted into chaos. Some stood, others whispered furiously. A few headed for the exits. I stayed in my seat, watching it all unfold, a strange calm settling over me. I'd done it. I'd exposed them, stripped them bare in front of everyone they knew. I felt no joy, only a hollow satisfaction, like finishing a project that had cost too much. I left before the play resumed, driving home in silence. Eleanor didn't come back that night. I didn't expect her to. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages from mutual friends, some shocked, some sympathetic, others angry on Eleanor's behalf. I didn't respond. I learned later that the play had been canceled, the theater board launching an investigation into Julian's conduct. The IRS audit hit him a week later, and whispers of his past misconduct resurfaced, costing him his position. Eleanor moved out, staying with a friend, and sent me a single text, "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't reply. The fallout was brutal, but it wasn't enough. I wanted Eleanor to feel the loss I felt, not just of trust but of identity, of the life she'd built. I contacted her school, anonymously, with copies of the photos, suggesting her behavior was unbecoming of a teacher. Within weeks, she was on administrative leave, her career in tatters. I sold the house, keeping only Baxter and my tools, and moved to a small apartment across town. I didn't gloat or celebrate. I just wanted to be done. Months later, I heard Eleanor had left Portland, starting over somewhere new, her reputation in ruins. Julian's consulting business collapsed under the audit, and he faded from the theater scene. I don't know if they stayed together, and I don't care. My revenge was complete, a bridge burned to ash. But as I sit in my quiet apartment, Baxter snoring at my feet, I wonder if I destroyed more than just their lives. The man I was, the one who loved Eleanor, who believed in trust, is gone too. And that, I think, is the cruelest price of all.